Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rachel. If you are new, I am a single woman in my 30s, in my late 30s, and I live in the Twin Cities, and I created this channel to help encourage young women in their pursuit of Christ, to encourage them to study His Word, and to persevere through tough times as well. One of my greatest struggles in my life has been my singleness and childlessness, since I wished to be a mother and to get married right after college, around age 18, 19. And then God had different plans for me, and He still has different plans for me than what I wanted or expected. So I was encouraged by some friends to make this channel just to encourage other women in their pursuit of Christ, and also just perseverance in the Christian life, because life can be really hard, as we all know, and there's different situations that come up that just can leave us very discouraged and hurt, and not wanting to turn to God because we're struggling. So today's topic is a heavy one, and I could talk about it for a very long time, but I will try to keep this video as brief as possible. But if people wish for me to have a part 2, kind of an expanded version, I am happy to do that. I just want to make sure that I am respecting people's time, and also respecting that everybody has different experiences with abandonment and rejection. And abandonment and rejection, and kind of the breaking apart, the severing of relationships. There's so many different scenarios, so many different reasons. I'm specifically going to be talking about romantic relationships, like dating, courting relationships that end and don't go into marriage. But this also very much applies to friendships that dissolve, to family members that leave you or you leave them, and then also just any type of relationship that you have in your life. A brief example, I will go through a few brief examples of what happened in my life. There's obviously many things I can't get into because of confidentiality and privacy and things like that. But a brief example, my first example of kind of abandonment or kind of rejection occurred in middle school. I had several close friends growing up. Like, we were really, really close, and we were 3 other girls, and we were close for many years in elementary school. We got into middle school, and I thought we would still be this kind of tight-knit group. I was a naive child, and I'm a very loyal person. Like, to this day, I want my relationships to last until death. Even friendships, I want to be like, till death do us part sort of thing. For friendships, and I've just learned over the years that unfortunately that's not possible. Sometimes because of location, people move. Sometimes it's because of other things. But anyway, so in middle school, one of these girls just suddenly stopped talking to me and the other girls in my group. Like, it was so sudden and so unexpected that I don't even remember like how it happened. It was just like one day she wanted nothing to do with us, and she wanted to make other friends. And then our friendship naturally dissolved, and I was a very shy child, and I didn't like confrontation, and I didn't like stress. So I very easily I didn't confront her. I never said anything to her, kind of like, hey, why don't you hang out with us anymore? Like I would do nowadays. But I still think about it to this day, because it was my first experience with abandonment and kind of rejection, and also not knowing why somebody is rejecting you. And then I started dating / courting, kind of getting to know men in my early 20s, in particular. and I did a lot of online dating, which I could do a whole other video on online dating. I think I might one day, because I've had so much experience with online dating. Thankfully, nothing really bad, praise God, nothing really bad has happened. But online dating is a very stressful and emotional situation. And my quick example with that, just to kind of show you some examples of the abandonment or rejection that I've experienced in my life. A few years ago, sorry, I think I'm getting over a cold or something's happening, so I apologize if my voice is a little bit scratchy. A few years ago, I met a man online, and he lived in another state. So after a while of conversing, he and I both agreed for me to fly to where he was. And then I stayed at a hotel because for safety reasons, I think that's what you have to do, unless you can stay with family members or friends or something else. Like, never, ever, ever fly and then be alone with the man is just, I feel just generally safe, especially when you meet online and you really don't know the other person. So this is an example of really not knowing this man, except for what we had discussed and talked about online. He was a very kind man. There was nothing about him that was like really sketchy or dangerous, praise God. But what happened was that I was in that state for a few days, and we did so many nice things. Like, from an outside perspective, he gave me an amazing tour of his city. He showed me where he worked. And then we went to close to one of my last days there. He took me to a nice restaurant, and we like dressed up, and it was so romantic, the typical romantic scene. And he had told me what I admired about him at first was I admired that he was a planner, and he also was really thinking about these things. Like, he wasn't like, hey, let's just meet for coffee and then we'll see where it goes. He knew that me flying out there was a big deal and a big step in our relationship. So he had planned for us to kind of understand where this was going. It was kind of going to be the official, like, okay, now we're officially courting, or we're officially a couple. He was going to make that decision by the end of the trip. But and then all of his behavior, all of his words, all of his demeanors, everything about what I was experiencing was telling me, yes, this man wants to pursue a serious relationship with me. But unfortunately, as I've learned in a lot of romantic relationships and some friendships, actions speak louder than words. And we want to believe what people tell us, and we want to believe their words, and we want to believe that their words are who they truly are. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. So in the case with this man, his actions were like, they seemed to coincide with his words. But then by the end of my time there, he actually told me that he doesn't know, that he's just very, very confused, and he's not sure if he wants to pursue a serious relationship, which was very surprising to me. And that was kind of like a kick in the stomach, because his actions and everything was telling me that, like, okay, he likes me and this is moving forward, or else I felt like I would have seen him cut it off earlier. So that was hard to process. But then what happened was that he came to me, and the next morning after, he had gone home and I went to the hotel, and then the next morning we met over breakfast, and he's like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Like, let's just see where it goes. Like, I just was, feeling the pressure and feeling stressed out, but let's just see where it goes. So we kind of ended it where he was saying, let's give it a shot. Like, let's keep talking to each other and seeing where it goes. And I said, great, that's a great idea. Like, we don't have to make a big decision today. let's just see where it goes and we'll keep talking and stuff. So he dropped me off at the airport and he gave me a big hug, and like, it all seemed so nice and wonderful. Like, okay, this is where we're going to go. We're going to keep pursuing this relationship. And then I was sitting in the airport probably for like, maybe it was like 30 minutes after he dropped me off and he left, and he had told me like, okay, I'll be in touch. Like, we'll talk again soon. 30 minutes after he dropped me off at the airport, he texted me and said, I don't want to see you or talk to you ever again. Because I just don't have a good feeling about pursuing a relationship with you, and I think you have a lot going on in your life. Basically, I had told him I was having surgery soon, and so that was the big thing that I was in my life. But I looking back, I think he was trying to find some examples of things that were like too much. But to be honest, I feel like it was his stress and his fears that were creating that anxiety in him, where he felt like he had to get out and he didn't want to keep pursuing a relationship. He got scared. So the way he did it though was so it was so hurtful, and it made me so angry, because it wasn't the fact that he said, hey, let's not be in a relationship. It was the way he did it, where he literally had told me something 30 minutes before, and then he completely changed it by a text. And it's possible that he just didn't want to tell me those things in person, and that's why he sent a text afterwards, because it's so much easier to text people and share your feelings, because you're like one step removed and you don't have to look them in the eye and say, I don't want to be with you. So it's obviously a lot easier to do the text route. But so that is an example of how it's not always the final decision that makes the abandonment or rejection hurt worse. It's like the way people do it. And I have had many experiences with men up until recently too, where their actions or their words are saying one thing, and then their actions are saying another thing, and then they don't fulfill their promises. They promise something and then they never fulfill that promise. And so it's one of those situations in life where, especially in romantic relationships, it's like a battlefield. Like, Satan is trying to attack us. God is trying to keep us on the right track. And to be honest, friends, I really struggled in my relationship with God throughout many times in my life because of a romantic relationship that never happened, or did happen and then went sour. And I was angry at God, and I blamed God, and I blamed the other person, and I was thinking, why me? Like, I've thrown the biggest self-pity parties ever. So I don't want you to think that I have it all together and I always have the right response to people, and I never get angry, because I am human and I have as many sinful thoughts as the next person, especially when somebody hurts me. I want to hurt them back. I think that's just a natural human reaction, but it's sinful. So it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of God's grace and help to do the right thing and choose the right actions when you are hurt. So today I wanted to, having said all that, if we take that example of a friend who suddenly stopped talking to me after many years of solid friendship. It's not like we were casual friends and then she left. It was like we were solid, good friends, and then suddenly she's like, oh, I want nothing to do with you. And I'm not going to tell you why. So if we take that example, and then the example of a man who was so confused and fearful and maybe other things, going on in his head, that he didn't approach the dating / courtship process in the right way to really protect my heart and protect his heart. I mean, that is the goal ultimately of any romantic relationship, is to protect your heart and protect the heart of the other person. And what's hard is that there's not a clear answer, and there's not a clear guidebook really for how to really protect yourself from hurt. Because the reality is that even if you try to be super pure and you try to be super guarded, when you start getting to know someone of the opposite sex in a romantic way, like possible, like, ooh, we could, something could happen, you are still setting yourself up for hurt, because you have to share things about yourself and think about the possibility of a future with this person, knowing that it may not pan out. And that's just the reality. But the goal is to be as, to protect your heart and protect the other person's heart as well as you can. And also, my number one, like advice or tip that I tell even the men that I'm dating or courting, I say honesty is the number one policy with me. Like that example with that man in the other state. Like, if he had just been honest from like day one, kind of like, yes, you flew here to see me, but I really don't know if I want a serious relationship with you or with anybody else. Like, I'm just not feeling it, or there's something. If he had told me that from like the get-go, I maybe wouldn't have been as hurt, because he, so by the end of the trip, he had made all these actions that made it seem like he wanted to be serious, and then he suddenly had to like backtrack and say, actually, I don't want to be serious. Actually, let's not do this, even though we had a romantic dinner and I pulled out all the stops and things like that. So anyway, when we have those situations, we can either become bitter and resent God and turn away from God and be hateful toward the other person, or we can try to be as compassionate and loving as possible toward the other person and go to God with our grief and our hurt. John 12:24-25 says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit." Jesus said that to his disciples, and there's so many applications to this passage, But when I think of it as it pertains to relationships, I think of it as it's not about getting what you want, even though we do want to be loved and we do want to be treasured, but it's also about the other person and respecting themselves. I mean, respecting them as a person and respecting their goals and where God has them. So I've heard a quote somewhere, I don't remember who said it, that one of the greatest acts of love is to let somebody go. Like, an example is if a woman really wants to be with a man, but the man has different plans for his life, or God says, I want the man to go this place, and you feel called to someplace else, or some other situation. The greatest act of love is to say, I really want to be with this man, but I know that it's possible that God's best for him is not for me to be his wife. So I'm going to let him go, and I'm going to let him live his own life without me. That is, and I've had to think about that for some of the men that I've wanted to court, is like, I think that man is better off if I'm not in his life for different reasons. So if we think about dying to self, that can also help us have the right perspective in other relationships. And then also we have to remember 1 Peter 5:8 says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour." Be mindful that Satan hates loving, godly relationships, whether that be friendships, family relationships, or romantic relationships. He wants to destroy relationships. And so he could use someone, he could lie to a friend of yours, and that friend could hurt you because she's listening to the lies of the devil. And it's not your fault, but that's what happened in that scenario. And you could be really hurt, but like, you have to release that friend to God, because the friend is going down a path that you know is not good for her. So just remember that Satan's trying to attack your friend or your romantic person. He's also trying to attack you. So that's why if we look to God for wisdom and help in all these things, then we will not be listening to the lies of the devil. Colossians 3:14 says, and above all these things, put on charity, love, a lot of the other versions say, which is the bond of perfectness. And when we love somebody, we have to be willing to let them go, and we can't cling on to them. God has been teaching me how to like let people go, not be like, no, you're mine. Like, you have to be in my life. Maybe God has plans for them where they have to move on, and they can't, and you can't have that solid friendship or that solid romantic relationship anymore. And yes, it hurts, and you have to grieve, and you have to go to God with that grief. But please remember that God sees your hurt, and God knows exactly what you're going through, and he will provide wisdom for your situation. Also wisdom of how to love the other person best. So I have 4 tips. I'm going to summarize this in 4 tips of what to do when a friendship is going sour, or a family member is driving you crazy, or there's something in that relationship with a family member where you're just like, I just don't know if I can keep talking to this person. Or a romantic relationship that is not going the way that you wish it would. There's 4 things that I would like to encourage you with. The first thing is, the first step, you can call these like 4 steps in an action plan of what to do. First is seek God for wisdom in the situation. Seek God in prayer is kind of the 2 big action steps. But the first thing you should do is, before you act, that means before you make an action, before you send that text, before you make a phone call, before you see somebody, that person in person, seek God for wisdom, because every situation is different. Number 2, pray hard before conversing with the offender. I'm calling it the offender in the example of someone who's really hurt you, but you still want to be reconciled to them. That's the best name that I can come up with. But the other person is not always the offender. Usually it's a 2-way street, but there are some times where it really is the other person. 90% of the, I don't know, the conflict in the situation in the relationship might be them. Sometimes that happens. So pray hard before conversing with the offender, whether that be through text or through in person, which it's always better to do things in person if possible. If you can't meet in person because of distance, a phone call is better than a text. Just being honest, with abandonment, my ex-fiance broke off our engagement officially over a text message. And he had a lot of things going on, but that is probably one of the most disrespectful ways to end a relationship, especially to end an engagement, is to just text someone. As I said, so many people, and I think a lot of men, like that idea of texting a girl saying, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just not interested, because they can like send it and then put their phone down and then walk away, and they don't have to necessarily wait for the girl to respond. And if the girl does respond, they can like delete the text right away, or you don't have to have a conversation. It's just like you're passing news, like, oh, bye, and I'm going to sign out now. So always talk to the other person in person if you can. Number 3 tip is to always seek reconciliation and a relationship with that other person if possible. Unless the person is toxic or really damaging to your life, then that you do need to set more boundaries, and you do maybe need to cut off the other person, because there's a lot of times the other person has mental health issues, physical health issues, lots of things that prevent them from thinking rationally and behaving appropriately in relationships. And then it's okay as a Christian to say, I need to draw boundaries and I need to maybe not talk to you, not because I don't love you, but because this is my way of supporting you or making sure that you don't hurt other people in your life more because of the way you communicate, or, all the situations are different. But in general, it's always good to try and seek reconciliation and relationship first. But if that is not possible, have your goodbyes be as respectful and loving as possible. It is so easy to think of awful things to say to the other person, like, you hypocrite, or you liar, or you told me you would do this and then you haven't, or I supported you through all this and this is how you repay me, or you told me you loved me and now you're taking it back. You can't just take back the words I love you. Like, there's all these things that you want to say to the other person. And sometimes if God can lead you to say things in a more respectful way, kind of like, I feel really hurt that you said that, or that you didn't fulfill your promise, because the other person does need to learn that their actions are not okay and that what they did really hurt you. But there's an appropriate way to say that, and then there's an inappropriate way to say that. So if you get too angry or you get too harsh with the other person, you're not showing Christ to them. You should be as loving and as truthful as possible, which usually means you're not yelling and screaming at them. So take some time away to collect yourself and process your thoughts, and pray before going to the other person and saying, okay, this is my response. Number 4, if the relationship ends, whether it be a friendship or a romantic relationship, ask God to bring a new friend or a new boyfriend into your life to encourage you. And I add that, it kind of feels silly for me to add that, but what I mean by that is not for you to be like, okay, move on to the next person, and I hope God brings me a boyfriend, by tomorrow, because he gave me this nasty one a week ago. Because the goal is not about us, but God also understands our feelings and understands exactly what we went through. So if we truly were hurt by the other person in the relationship, God sees that and he weeps with us and he grieves with us. And in his timing, he can bring somebody else into your life. Maybe he'll bring a better friend into your life. Maybe he will bring a better romantic partner into your life who will become, hopefully, your lifelong husband or wife. Like, God can do so many things. And something that God has taught me recently is that when I've gone to him with really painful relationships that have ended, usually romantic relationships, or men who I hoped would pursue me and then they never did, God has been teaching me that, like, just because the story has ended, like your story with that person has ended, it doesn't mean that God is done writing the story. You and that other person could reconnect at some point. The other person could ask for forgiveness in the future. Even 10 years from now, they could ask for forgiveness. Or that other person will be so affected by your role in their life that maybe they will change and become a better person because of your witness for Christ. So remember that this is about your witness for Christ and not about you gaining popularity and gaining 5,000 friends on Facebook. It's about making disciples, not friends, ultimately. And it's about making disciples not getting married. So that is why we have to remember that even when we get hurt by other relationships, God is not done writing the story. And maybe it'll take heaven for us to learn exactly why that relationship ended. But I can't wait to see, for me personally, kind of like the next steps, or what happened after that relationship ended and how that affected the other person. And hopefully my impact on their life impacted them for good. And that's why I say it's so important not to end a relationship with someone with really mean words, because then the last thing that person is gonna think is like, oh yeah, that girl that I dated, she seemed like a Christian and was really nice, but then when I broke up with her, she just swore at me and she said all these nasty things to me. They're gonna remember that last text that you sent. Don't text, but I mean the last words that you say to this person. So that's why you need to have your words, your goodbyes, be as respectful and loving as possible, even when you want to be mean. It's so hard, but ask God to give you the grace and the wisdom to love the other person and want the best for the other person, and then ask God to take away your pain and to soothe your pain from the abandonment or rejection from the other person. So I tried not to make this super long, and here we are over 30 minutes again, but I feel like this is such a big topic, and especially with romantic relationships, everyone who is single and a certain age has dealt with rejection at least once. Usually it's more than once. So it's important to know how to deal with these things. If you want to add anything else to what I said, or if you think that I was wrong in anything I said, please let me know in the comments. I definitely don't know everything, and this is just from my experience of with different forms of rejection and abandonment, what I've learned. But keeping Christ is number one, even when bad things happen, is so important. So I love you all. Thank you for watching this video. If you made it to the end, congratulations. You get a gold star. And let me know in the comments if you want me to do a part 2, or if you want me to talk about a different topic, and I will get back to you when I can. Love you all, and God bless.